Happy Thursday. Welcome to On Balance. I'm Elizabeth Pran in for Leland Vittert tonight, and we begin with breaking news from a jam-packed day on the campaign trail. You can certainly tell we are heading into September by the travel schedules of both candidates. These are live pictures of La Crosse, Wisconsin. Donald Trump is about to hold a town hall. J.D. Vance, his running mate, spent the morning in the deep blue city of Boston. He faced some mixed reactions when he greeted the crowd.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Well, Semper Fi, guys. We got some, it sounds like we got some fans and some haters. That's okay.
Yep, he seems okay with it. Carried on. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris just held a rally in the battleground state of Georgia where she stayed on her message of freedom and joy.
Ours is a fight for the future. And it is a fight for freedom. Generations of Americans before us led the fight for freedom. Now, Savannah, the baton is in our hands.
It's working. Her positivity, her enthusiasm, Gallup polling shows enthusiasm among Democratic voters is at its highest level since 2008. You remember 2008. And up 23 percentage points since Harris replaced Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. But there's also a new swing state polling that we're looking at. It spells some good news for Donald Trump in Wisconsin. We're going to break down those numbers in just a moment. But first, former President Donald Trump's Arlington dilemma. You've probably been following it. The former president's event tonight is being overshadowed by the continued fallout over his appearance at Arlington National Cemetery on Monday. The backlash only intensified today after an Army spokesperson slammed Trump's campaign just hours ago, saying an Arlington National Cemetery worker was pushed aside during a dispute. That person, however, not pressing charges. It all revolves around this. You probably saw it, a photo taken in Section 60 at Arlington National Cemetery with the famous thumbs up that we've seen before. The backdrop, fallen service members' graves. And if you know anything about Section 60, it's heroes who passed away in Afghanistan and Iraq. Filming and any photography within this section of the cemetery is a violation of federal law, and cemetery officials say Trump's campaign simply ignored warnings that they could not take pictures, they could not take videos at this location, this burial site. In the meantime, 5 Gold Star families are defending the former president. They just released a joint statement that says, in part, the president and his team conducted themselves with nothing but the utmost respect. We had given our approval for President Trump's official videographer and photographer to attend the event. The former president spoke about the backlash this afternoon.
Last night I read that I was using the site to politic, that I used it to politic. And they say I was campaigning. I don't need, the one thing I get is plenty of publicity. I don't need that. I don't need the publicity.
While we wait for Trump, we're also waiting for Kamala Harris's first interview since becoming the nominee. You've probably seen teases of it throughout the day. Here's just a part of what she said about how she's changed on policy positions like the Green New Deal.
We have set goals for the United States of America and, by extension, the globe around when we should meet certain standards for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as an example. That value has not changed. My value around what we need to do to secure our border, that value has not changed.
All right, so you can tell we have quite a lot to get to tonight. Kicking off our coverage tonight, Mark Lauder and Chris Hahn, former senior aide to Senator Chuck Schumer and host of the Aggressive Progressive podcast. Both of you gentlemen, I think, are locked and loaded, right? It's been such a busy news day. So, Chris, I want to start with you because, well, the optics aren't great, right? And I feel like you're ready. You're chomping at the bit at this one.
So here's the thing. This is going to be a close election. Veterans tend to support Donald Trump. If he loses 2 to 5% of veterans by his actions towards veterans, like taking pictures at cemeteries, like saying that the Medal of Honor is not the greatest thing. In fact, I'll give my donor a medal that's better. If he loses some of them, it could cost him a state. And he keeps on doing it. And I think the media has a double standard. If a Democrat had done this, it'd be the only thing the media was talking about at all today. We wouldn't be talking about anything else. If Barack Obama had done this, if Kamala Harris had done this, it'd be the number one story. They would be lining up veterans to talk about how bad it was. But again, it doesn't take all veterans to disappear from Trump's column. It only takes about 2 to 5% of them. And I think he's doing a great job of turning them off. He's probably going to lose about 15% from his prior support from veterans.
15? Mark, do you think he's going to lose 15%? I mean, seems pretty bulletproof to me.
Absolutely not. Look, the real controversy should be why wasn't Kamala Harris and Joe Biden honoring the 13 servicemen and women who died because of their botched handling of the Afghanistan withdrawal. And while Joe Biden was on the beach, and we have no idea what Kamala Harris was up to, probably trying to study for a 18-minute interview, Donald Trump was there laying a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns and visiting with families of people whose family members we'd lost in service. And so you can try to make this about something else, but one side was there. The other side was responsible for it. they can't even take ownership of it, let alone honor those who have fallen.
Mark, this was Donald Trump's deal to withdraw from Afghanistan. It was his deal to withdraw from Afghanistan. Joe Biden greeted those caskets when they came back from Afghanistan, something that Donald Trump never did as president when bodies would come home. Donald Trump doesn't like to be around
another lie. How many lies are you going to talk about here?
He denigrates veterans at every turn. He calls them suckers and losers. And all it's going to take is 5%
debunked
of them
by liberals.
Oh my God! It's over for him. And by the way, he's losing them. I'm talking
you should go to Comedy Central, buddy.
He's losing them every day, and you know it, Mark.
Okay, I'm going to shift us a little bit, although I do. I love it. I love the passions
and funny stuff.
Okay, I want to talk about the two storylines that we're seeing from the campaigns, right? We see the vice president in the swing state of Georgia. We see them stumping very much, especially today and heading into September. So, Mark, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Wall Street Journal said there's been a reboot in the campaign and Donald Trump's campaign, that they're going to be focusing more on issues. They're going to be holding smaller events. Does that play with his campaign, or does he get the energy in these big, big rallies?
Well, I think it'll be a combination of both. I love this move because really this is going to be decided by policy. Enthusiasm, vibes, joy aren't going to lower anyone's gas and grocery bills that were driven up by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It's not going to secure the border, which was opened up by Kamala Harris, the border czar, and Joe Biden. And it's not going to bring our world to peace, which is now spinning in chaos because of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So keep focusing on policy. You'll still do a couple of 2-3 big rallies per week, but these smaller events talking about policy, because people remember things were more affordable under Donald Trump, the border was more secure, and the world was safer under Donald Trump. Kamala Harris doesn't even know what her policy is.
You know, Chris, I think you need to react to that.
Yeah, the border was, there was a lot less traffic in the border in 2020 because it was the worst year in the history of this country. People weren't coming here because they were stuck in their houses and gas prices were low.
You've had more people in 1 year than they had in all 4 under Trump.
Donald Trump failed to protect us from COVID, and he allowed the economy to crumble. And that's why things were cheap, because nobody had any money.
More people died under Joe Biden
became president and reopened up. When Joe Biden became president and reopened the economy, prices spiked and people had jobs. And now inflation has come down. So you're going to need another storyline. And as for these resets of Donald Trump, look, the American people are exhausted by Donald Trump, and they're tired of his same old act. His campaign knows that. So they're going to try to do more intimate settings where he sticks to policy. But Donald Trump can't control himself, because old men don't change their ways, especially when they're nearing 80. And Donald Trump will never change his ways because he's been getting his way his entire life. The problem for him now is the American people are done with it. It's tired, it's old, and it's about to be canceled for good.
You know, Chris, if I wanted to elaborate on one thing.
What does Kamala Harris stand for today? Because it doesn't seem like anything.
Well, and Chris, I want to ask you, she is separating herself a little bit from the Biden camp. So when she goes forward, if she says, I want to bring new energy, I want to bring new life, well, you were just working for the past 3.5 years for the president. So what are you going to do differently? Does it behoove her to separate herself from the Biden camp?
I think where she needs to, she can. Where she doesn't, she can embrace it. But here's the thing, and I know Mark knows this, right? He's a smart, policy. He's a smart campaign guy. He understands this. They're trying to make this campaign about Kamala Harris. It's not. It's about whether the American people want 4 more years of Donald Trump. And believe me, they don't, right? The only reason he was leading in the polls is because people thought that Joe Biden wouldn't survive 4 years. Well, now there's a younger, more energetic person who's running. And all she's really got to do is work hard, get her vote out, and she's going to win this race because it's going to be about Donald Trump. A referendum about Donald Trump, almost as if he was the incumbent. And that is the problem the Trump campaign is facing right now. That's what that Wall Street Journal article was alluding to with the reset, because they now know that this is not, they were planning on campaigning about Joe Biden is weak and old and feeble, and they were going to win. And now they're not. Now they're running against a younger, more energetic person who's saying, hey, look, these guys want to bring us back. They want you to be afraid. They want you to live in fear. We want to bring American exceptionalism back and lift the American people up. And I get it. There's not a lot of policy in that. But you know what? I've been on campaigns my whole life. Nobody's ever asked me for a white paper on anything other than a reporter. Voters do not look for that. They want to know where you feel, and most importantly, they want to know who will fight for them. And Donald Trump, a guy who was a millionaire at the age of 3, a guy who's completely out of touch, probably has never been to a supermarket in his life to shop, other maybe to buy the supermarket itself. He's not going to fight for them. The Trump campaign knows it. Mark is smart enough to know it, too. So he'll spin all he wants.
All right.
I welcome it, Mark. That's what we're here for.
All right, Mark, I'll give you the last word. Mark, I'll give you the last word. We have about 30 seconds. I want to hear it.
I mean, you really can't make this up. You're actually arguing that the sitting vice president of the United States is not the incumbent. It's the Biden-Harris campaign. It has been. There's a reason why Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the most unpopular politicians in the last 70 years. Because people want lower prices. They want a secure border. You're not getting any of that under Kamala Harris.
All
right. Well, Mark Lauder, Chris Hahn.
He knew nothing about Iran-Contra. It worked.
We wanted a lively conversation, and I will say that you both delivered. And the fact of the matter is that you represent views from both sides of the aisle, and that's how people feel. So we're grateful that you joined us tonight. Thank you for letting us start out strong, gentlemen. Appreciate you. Coming up, we are going to head south as the campaigns hone in on what it takes to win a swing state. And time is not always the answer, but why, after 39 days of near silence, presidential nominee Kamala Harris's first interview could very well be a field day for critics.
A tight race until the very end, okay? So let's not pay too much attention to the polls, because we are running as the underdog.
The underdog, you heard it. That was Kamala Harris earlier this evening at a rally in Savannah, Georgia. If you've been paying attention her campaign, you've noticed that one of her central themes is that she is the underdog. But if you look at that polling, it looks like she actually has the edge. So our Decision Desk HQ national average of polls shows that she's leading by nearly 4 points within the margin of error. Just about 27 days ago, she trailed Donald Trump. But there's also some brand new polling from our partners at The Hill. NewsNation's Joe Khalil is here to break down those numbers for us. Joe, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you, Elizabeth? So these new numbers are really significant, because what they show us is that Kamala Harris has all but erased the lead that Donald Trump had on Joe Biden just at the beginning of last month. Now, she is winning nationally in those polls by about 4 points, but what really matters, where the rubber meets the road, are going to be in those state polls, especially in those battleground states. And what we see now is that this race is at a virtual standstill. It is a toss-up. Let's go ahead and take a look at the states now. Of the 7 battleground states that we're talking about here that are really going to decide the election, 3 swing Trump's favor, and these are those 3 right now: Arizona, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. But you can see his margin is incredibly small. He's winning by 1 point, by 3 points, and then by 2 points. You look at the states that are in Kamala Harris's favor, and it's the same thing by the same margin. She has 3 states that lean her way by 1 point, 1 point, and 3 points. So that margin is within the margin of error. So those are 6 of the 7 battleground states. The other battleground state that we have not mentioned here is Pennsylvania, and that is because there is no lead. The recent poll from our partners at The Hill shows a 48-48 tie. So what this tells us is that these two candidates are going to be spending a lot of time in these 7 states, continuing to do as they are now. This morning, Kamala Harris was in Georgia. Her running mate, Tim Walz, was in North Carolina. Donald Trump spent time in Michigan today. It just shows you how crucial each one individually of those states are. And let's say the election were held today and assume the poll that we just saw is actually the result that you get on Election Day. It doesn't actually give either one of the candidates the victory. They need 270 electoral votes to win. Kamala Harris would end up getting 263 with her 3 swing states that lean her way. Trump would get 256. So the entire election would come down to Pennsylvania, just one single state. Again, Elizabeth, that is how close this race is. It's almost impossible to think of a scenario where you can even be closer than they are right now. So amazingly, she has erased this lead. She wants to be the underdog, but right now, if we're being honest with ourselves, it is anybody's race. I'm not sure that there is an underdog at this point.
Yeah, unbelievable. When they say every 4 years that every vote matters, I think that would be an understatement come November. Joe Cleel, thank you so much for joining us. Let's bring in former Obama Regional Campaign Director Robin Byro. Robin, thank you for joining us. Certainly not your first rodeo. A lot of attention at Georgia, which tells me that Georgia is very important. Georgia became important, as we know when, and now it appears in this election it's going to be very important. We see her in the Peach State. We've seen the former president in the Peach State. Why are we focusing so much on Georgia?
Georgia is an anomaly. I mean, just look at our governor, Brian Kemp. He at first spoke against Donald Trump, and now he's endorsed him. But, they've exchanged barbs every so often. But I just want to point out that right now in Georgia, Stacey Abrams has also registered hundreds of thousands of voters here in Georgia and was a force to be reckoned with. But let me just point out, I looked up some numbers, Elizabeth, and you'll be interested to know that in Georgia, the Democratic Party has 26 field offices right now in the state of Georgia. Donald Trump has 12. So both parties are investing heavily, but I think my party, the Democratic Party, is really banking it all on Georgia right now and Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I saw that number about the field offices. If I'm not mistaken, she's hired at least 190 staffers in Georgia. Yep. She obviously spent much of her time in Savannah. You brought up a really interesting point about the governor. What does it tell you that, yes, they have traded barbs, but we've seen the governor in just the past 24 hours making some rounds and saying, listen, we need to be focused on winning. We need to be focused on coming together. Does that surprise you that you're seeing the support from the governor?
No, and I just want to point out that I checked, and Brian Kemp has one of the highest favorability ratings right now in all of the country for governors. He's polling at 64% favorability right now, so he's polling in quite a bit of Democrats as well. So what he says really carries a lot of weight in this state, which is why it was a grievous misstep when Donald Trump was here rallying and launched some barbs at him, and that got heated. But I think now, they mended the fences, and I think they're, working together now to try and see if they can deliver the state for Republicans. But my party is giving them a run for their money, Elizabeth.
When we talk about just 3.5 years ago and that very infamous call, less than 12,000 votes decided Georgia. And it really is interesting. If you start to look at the minutia and the urban vote, you have the Cobb County and the Fulton County, which is very densely populated, and they typically go blue. But then you have the rural counties, and you just cannot underestimate some of these rural counties in the state of Georgia. What makes it so unique? Because I think as a candidate, you can come into certain counties, but you can't underestimate that there's a huge amount of the population that doesn't necessarily live in the city.
That's right. You're exactly right. Of course, the population nexuses are Atlanta and Savannah, Columbus, but yes, those rural areas really, that's why they're crisscrossing. These candidates are doing a bus tour, as you saw, both of them, all across crisscrossing Georgia and speaking to farmers. There's a huge farming community here in the Peach State. That's why we call it the Peach State. So it really matters. And their concerns are quite a bit different in the rural areas than maybe we have here. I'm speaking to you from DeKalb, so it's quite a bit different in DeKalb than it is in the more rural areas.
Yeah, and I remember when I was talking to different state lawmakers and what the Democrats wanted, they really wanted to focus on social issues. And I remember speaking to some of the Republican lawmakers out in rural counties, and they wanted to talk about immigration. They wanted to hear different things from different candidates. So Robin Byro, never a dull moment, especially when it comes to the Peach State. And I suspect we'll be seeing the candidates here. It is very important this coming election. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, most definitely. Thank you so much.
Coming up, Kamala Harris is finally talking to the press, but what she says may not quell the critics. What we're looking for coming up next. And we're waiting on former President Trump to make remarks in Wisconsin. Of course, when he gets to the podium, we'll bring it to you live. Welcome back. It's been 39 days since Vice President Kamala Harris has slid to the top of the ticket without even having a single meaningful interaction with the press until today. She did her first sit-down interview. Well, it wasn't alone. It wasn't live. There were no questions from voters or an open audience. It was a scheduled pre-taped interview with CNN alongside of her running mate, Tim Walz. The host, Dana Bash, the same person who arguably gave hand signals to President Biden during the debate when he couldn't find the moderator. In what little we've seen so far, Vice President Harris tells her when it comes to changing views on policies, there's nothing wrong with what's evolved.
The most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. You mentioned the Green New Deal. I have always believed, and I have worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time.
Niall Standish, White House columnist with our partners over on the Hill, writes 5 things to watch in her first big interview as a Democratic nominee. Number 1, are there any gaffes? Number 2, does the decision to include Walz work or does it not work? How tough are the questions? Does she get defensive, as she has in the past? Does Harris signal any difference between her and President Biden? And Niall joins us now. Niall, we have you on because you are so fair, and we love getting your input. We're getting little snippets from the interview, so I want to play one more. I thought this was really interesting about whether or not she would reach across the aisle. Listen to what she said.
Will you appoint a Republican to your cabinet?
Yes, I would.
Anyone
yes,
in mind?
I would. No one in particular in mind. We got 68 days to go with this election, so I'm not putting the cart before the horse. But I would. I think it's really important. I have spent my career inviting diversity of opinion.
You know, Niall, we're just getting some snippets, so I can't necessarily get your reaction entirely, but we are getting the taste of the interview. What do you want to see from her tonight at 9 p.m.?
Well, I think one of the things is, can she stand up to more adversarial questioning? The actual broad argument about her not having submitted to an interview so far is the idea that she's dodging scrutiny. So convention speeches are all very well, campaign events, TV ads, that's all fine. But how can you defend your position when you're put under pressure? Now, we haven't yet seen whether she is put under real pressure. We did see that question about her shift in positions, which was asked, in a rather mild way, I thought. But we'll have to see the whole interview to see if there is more heated moments than that.
You know, I was actually going to ask you that because it did seem a little bit like a lob, if you will, maybe a soft question. But like you said, we're waiting until 9 p.m. Why is it so important when it's not your first rodeo, you've covered a number of campaigns, for voters to see this side of a candidate, for voters to see how they think on their feet or how conversations come up organically? Why is it important that we haven't seen this side of her?
Well, it's important because of this suggestion that she is evading these kind of encounters. And just on a very basic level, voters have an entirely understandable and valid desire to probe candidates, to test candidates, not to just take them at their word or take the best foot that they choose to put forward in their own campaign materials. So I think in that respect, it is important to see a candidate being able to articulate her or his positions and to be able to defend those positions. And that's what we haven't seen so far from Vice President Harris.
You know, there's been a lot of scrutiny with her flip-flopping on positions, whether it be fracking, whether it be the border crisis and immigration and the wall. Is that so wrong from a candidate? A candidate can evolve, right? A candidate can change their views as times change. But there are a lot of flip-flops that she has made, no?
There are, and the question is, how much will they matter? On one hand, Vice President Harris has been dogged for some time by the questions around her authenticity. Back in 2020, she ran for the Democratic nomination. That was a very underwhelming campaign, partly for exactly this question: where does she stand? Now, the flip side, Elizabeth, is there is an idea that voters don't care whether you flip-flop as long as you end up facing in the direction that they want you to face. And maybe there aren't that many damages to be incurred by doing it. It's also worth pointing out that former President Trump earlier in his life had many different views than he does now on questions like abortion or universal health care.
You know, there's been a little bit of scrutiny when she comes with her themes of starting anew, bringing change. And people pause and say, well, you're part of the current administration. Are we forgetting that? Is she doing damage by distancing herself from what President Biden has accomplished in the past?
This is a real challenge for any sitting vice president, and Kamala Harris is the first sitting vice president to become her party nominee in almost a quarter century, since Al Gore in 2000. I think that she does have to present something new, because you look at every poll, Elizabeth, and the economy is the top issue. At the same time, President Biden gets pretty low marks on the economy. So what can Kamala Harris say that persuades voters that she can deliver better economic stewardship without appearing disloyal? Can she persuade voters that a Harris economy would at least feel better to them than the Biden economy does at this point?
Yeah, it's a game of chess. I don't envy either of them as they head into September. Niall, I'm grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us tonight as we break down what is apparently a very historic election. Thank you.
Thank you.
And as we head to break, former President Trump has just landed in Wisconsin. He is planning a town hall this evening. You can see him deplaning. As soon as he gets to the podium, we will bring it to you live. Stay with us. Are waiting for former President Donald Trump to deplane. He is hosting a town hall tonight with Tulsi Gabbard, a veteran herself. Of course, we will cover it live here on NewsNation. We are waiting patiently for the president. Of course, if he comes off the plane and approaches the cameras, we will also bring that to you live. But as I mentioned, in about an hour or so, we will hear from the president here on NewsNation. In the meantime, Vice President nominee J.D. Vance is not backing down after comments he made back in 2021, criticizing the head of the teachers union for pushing policy, even though that person, that woman, doesn't have her own biological children. A comment the union had questioned.
The guy who's running for vice president now takes on every teacher who doesn't, who he thinks doesn't have kids. By the way, I had kids by marriage, but every teacher he thinks doesn't have kids, and takes on every modern family at the same time, takes on Catholic nuns, takes on new teachers who haven't gotten married yet. I mean, what is he doing? What is he thinking?
I just said if she wants to brainwash anybody's kids, she ought to have her own and leave mine alone. And I still believe that, by the way.
So you heard that was his rebuttal. The latest controversy involving Vance is just another way to show you how important families are to campaigns. Just this week, the Surgeon General wrote an op-ed saying parents have never been more stressed as they are today. The headline reads, in part, parents are at their wits' end. We can do better. And then Dr. Murphy laid out policies that could combat that.
We need to pursue measures like paid leave so parents can be with a sick child, for example. We need affordable child care. We need consistent, accessible mental health care for kids and adults. And we've got to address the harms of social media, address issues like gun violence, which contribute to the stress and strain on parents' day-to-day lives.
There's a lot to digest there. What exactly can the federal government do to restore family values to ensure the success of the next generation? It's a loaded question, as I mentioned. Who better to answer than Adrienne Schweer, mom of 5 and fellow at the Bipartisan Policy Center, and she is with us now. Adrienne, you know, I listened to some of his solutions, and they sounded wonderful. Are we getting to the root of the problem here?
I don't know how we get to the root of the problem with a single solution. I appreciate that he's bringing forward multiple solutions. I think it takes federal policy, state policy. It takes communities and strong families, and but I appreciate that both vice presidential candidates, both presidential candidates, our now Surgeon General are talking about the fact that parents are really struggling in today's economy to balance both work and their families, and we need to intervene and we need to support them better.
So as a mother of 5, you know, what would you suggest if you had either of the candidates, even just for 10 minutes, what would you suggest to them? I love the tax credit. I think it's so helpful, but there needs to be more, right? There needs to be more family structure or support for families. And how can the candidates do that?
I mean, the child tax credit is a really good start. I'm a mother of 5. Most people look at me like I have 5 eyeballs. I'm not saying that's what every woman should want, but the average woman wants 2.3 children and she's having 1.5, which sounds obnoxious. But the core element there is that she's not having the family she wants to have. So that is left out of the Surgeon General's report, and a really important element to one of the driving forces underneath how parents are dealing with life today. You know, fertility issues, not being able to have the family they want is a whole separate bucket that isn't put on the table with some of the news over the last couple of days, but has certainly been a high priority topic on the campaign trail. What excites me, and a tiny bit of fun history, I mean, the child tax credit is a fascinating and important federal policy that brings the support of families into our core tax code. It used to be only $1,000 a year, and it was still a meaningful thing. I remember my parents really valuing it every year when they were filing their taxes. President Trump, when he passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, he doubled the child tax credit to $2,000. Making it really, really meaningful for a lot of families. And then President Biden took it even further during one of the COVID relief plans that Democrats passed using reconciliation, and he brought it up to $3,600. And we have, you know, J.D. Vance talking about making it $5,000, and we have Vice President Harris now talking about making it $6,000 for new parents. These are really, really big doubles down on a core policy that has a lot of proof underneath it about supporting families financially, giving them the freedom to choose what to do with those resources. Part of that policy is often tied to work, and, you know, it's more refundable. It brings more financial dollars to you if you have a taxable income. It's a really interesting policy to see both sides of the aisle campaigning on with a really substantive change. And I don't think it's a standalone solution. You know, I love paid family leave. It's what I study every day. I think the child tax credit is incredible. I think we need to double down on it and give families that freedom, but it's not a panacea to the solution. We need really strong bipartisan policies around paid family leave, particularly for new parents who are really struggling. We did some research last year on people post-pandemic that had left work and weren't looking for work. 1/3 of them are caring for children or caring for loved ones. And we found a huge percentage would go back to work or wouldn't have left work if they had paid parental leave. Like, it is this policy that would help people stay connected to their job and balance their family, which is what they want.
Right. I think you're right. I think that we're missing a demographic of women who want to be in the workforce and can't figure out how to navigate it because they also have to live up to expectations that maybe they can't, right? Adrienne, I wish we had more time. I would love to talk to you more about it. It's such a loaded issue, but you can certainly tell how important it is to both sides of the aisle. So we are enthusiastic to see what happens over the next year or so. Thank you for joining us.
Me too. Thank you.
Speaking of enthusiasm, it has jumped since Kamala Harris became the Democratic nominee. But students at her alma mater are saying she doesn't have their vote in the bag. And we're going to ask them coming up next live. And we are minutes away from former President Trump making remarks in Wisconsin as both candidates cover the swing states today. Welcome back. If you're looking to see what states will decide the upcoming election, just check out the travel schedule of Vice President Harris and former President Donald Trump. They were stumping in critical swing states today. Both know that their future, as well as yours, depends on it.
The future is always worth fighting for. We are in right now a fight for America's future.
Now Kamala says she wants to talk about the future, but she's been there for 3.5 years.
And if you look around college campuses, students are very active. Some of those who will be deciding are students at Harris's alma mater, Howard University. They're watching her campaign closely as they decide whether or not they're going to be voting for her. Kyla Austin and Desmond Rozier are seniors at Howard University. They're going to get to us in just a minute about how they feel about the campaign. But first, NewsNation's Alex Capriello is here. You are in Savannah, Alex. I was looking quickly, and if I'm not mistaken, there's tens of millions of Gen Z voters who are going to be heading to the ballot box in November, even more so than we had in the midterms just 2 years ago. So what are the campaigns doing to reach out to this younger generation?
Yeah, really fascinating to see the Harris campaign latch on to this idea of trying to attract as many young voters as possible, bring them on board, whether or not they're first-time voters or perhaps independents or Republicans that they can actually flip. So we're seeing a really concentrated effort from this team to try to attract those people. So how exactly are they doing that? Well, first and foremost, they're investing big when it comes to digital ads and social media. Of course, if you take a look at any Gen Z nowadays, they're going to have a phone in their hand. So hopefully they can try to attract them that way. We're also seeing the actual numbers increase in terms of campaign staff who are targeting youth organizations. And then finally, this really concentrated campus tour, 150 campuses across America, but most notably in some of those swing states, 11 states in particular. Some of those include Pennsylvania. That's a swing state in the Rust Belt. Also Nevada, Arizona, and then, of course, Georgia, where I'm currently standing. And then one little fact that I can share with you today from the rally, we actually had a Savannah State University student. She was the one who actually introduced Kamala Harris to that stage earlier this evening. So that's proof in the pudding right there that they really want to try to get these young people on board and in speaking roles so that way they can pass on the word about Kamala Harris. She's also focusing on key issues for that Gen Z demographic, most notably reproductive rights and combating gun violence. Now, what's interesting, something that I just learned earlier today, too, is that the fact that these candidates are trying to attract Gen Z voters isn't lost on the Trump campaign. In fact, he has a very good social media presence, as you know, on both Truth Social as well as Twitter and TikTok. The only difference is, while he may have a larger following than Kamala Harris, something I learned today is that she has a much higher engagement level. And as you know, Elizabeth, engagement is what actually drives clicks when it comes to the world of social media. So it seems she's making some headway, at least in that regard.
Alex, I didn't know that, but I have a daughter who thinks that she's a teenager and would, in fact, tell me that engagement is actually something that says you're more of an influencer. So I'm learning as well, Alex. Thank you so much. I'm curious at how this is sitting with that generation. So we'll see. Thank you very much. Let's bring in Kyla Austin and Desmond Rozier, seniors at Howard University. All right. So if I can start with you, Desmond, I saw some of your quotes in an article where you said it's not necessarily a shoo-in was sort of my takeaway. She still has to earn your vote. Is that what you're hearing throughout the campus?
Well, look, it's not what I'm hearing throughout the campus, but I just know that as a young student, I am fired up and I'm ready to work. Vice President Kamala Harris, her campaign is energizing communities across the country. Black communities, Asian communities, and minority communities are proud to see the American dream on the ballot. And that's what it is. That's what I'm happy to see on the ballot. And I know that there's no other option for me on the ballot this November other than Vice President Kamala Harris.
Okay, Kyla, I want to get to what voters matter to you. What matters to you, what matters to your friends and your family. And are you hearing that from the Harris campaign? Is she speaking to you?
Yeah, I would definitely say I feel as though her campaign is speaking to me and Gen Z specifically. Her stance on gun violence prevention, and even her and Biden opening the first office of gun violence prevention in the White House has been, historical. And I think with Gen Z especially, we're the generation that's had to deal with learning how to do school shooter drills and things of that nature. So we care about gun violence prevention. We care about climate change, canceling student loan debt. And these are all issues that I feel like the Harris campaign team is really hitting on, especially in their digital advertising, as we talked about earlier.
Okay, and I'm hearing that from Desmond too, but are you hearing enough from her when it comes to those issues? And also, do you feel like the energy shift came when she took the top of the ticket? Desmond, that one's for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when Vice President Kamala Harris came to the ticket, it brought hope back to America. We've seen what 4 years of a Trump presidency looked like. We've seen 4 years of failure, and that is something that we do not need to see again. But I know I've mentioned before the thing about accountability, and within the next days and weeks, I want to see Vice President Kamala Harris to continue to encourage President Biden to continue his political promises. For example, like Kayla said, canceling student debt, crack down on gun violence, and a strong ending Biden-Harris administration only sets up a strong administration later on when Vice President Kamala Harris wins this election in November.
All right, Kayla, I only have about 30 seconds. I think my last question to you was, were you going to vote for President Biden, or were you waiting to get until you saw someone who you really wanted at the top of the ticket?
For me, my plan was to vote blue regardless. I'm not going to lie, but I can say Harris being on this ballot, It has energized Gen Z and has definitely energized Howard's campus. Like, we're looking at her policies and what she stands for. But I will say Howard students are ready to move and to mobilize.
All right. Well, Kayla and Desmond, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your input. Very well put. And we will continue to watch as the campaign heats up into November. Thank you so much for joining us. And you at home, thank you for joining us on Balance tonight. We're grateful for your viewership. Up next, Chris Cuomo.